Good morning and welcome to the Center for Spiritual Living Denver's online Sunday service. We are a loving, prospering community in the heart of Capitol Hill and online. And hey, we get it. 2021 has started out to be an interesting year to say the least. We know that with everything going on in the world, life can seem like a struggle. Here at CSL Denver, we want you to know that we are here for you. Please know that our practitioners are available for prayer work with you. Our names and phone numbers are on the website, www.csldenver.org, or if you have a specific prayer request, please email it to info@csldenver.org. And Reverend Elzia, along with our guest speakers, all of our practitioners, our music and service coordinators, want you to know how truly grateful we are for the online support that you have all given us. Thank you for watching our Sunday services, attending our online workshops and events, and for providing financial support so that we can keep our virtual doors wide open. We love you all and know that we'll be seeing you in the right and perfect time. Until then, we'll stay online with our Sunday services and do everything we can to bring you an inspiring experience. If you are interested in upcoming events and information, remember, we send out a weekly newsletter. Just head over to the website, csldenver.org, and sign up for the newsletter. We only send one per week and promise not to slam your inbox. You're also welcome to send an email to us, info@csldenver.org, and request to be put on the mailing list. Speaking of upcoming events, on Sunday, March 14th, from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Mountain Time, our very own practitioner Tim Hancock will be facilitating a workshop on prayer or meditation via Zoom. If you're interested, please send an email to info@csldenver.org requesting to be put on the class list, and we'll send you a Zoom invitation as we get closer to March 14th. Hey folks, and remember, this week we're having our usual Zoom virtual fellowship right after service. If you haven't already received an email this morning, please send an email to info@csldenver.org and request a Zoom invitation. We'll make sure you get the invitation as quick as we can. Please join us. We'd love to say hi, catch up, and connect immediately following today's service in our Zoom virtual fellowship. All right, that's about all the time we've got for announcements today. Let's get back into the music with more by Freddie Rodriguez Jr.
God cannot be bound, enslaved or imprisoned. Freedom is our right, divine way of living. Be free, the truth will set you free. Be free, the truth will set you free. As the river flows, swim with the water, 'cause God is that now. Freedom is our power. Be free, the truth will set you free. Be free, the truth will set you free. The soul is pure, the music flows free. Be free, the truth will set you free. Be free, the truth will set you free. The truth will set you free. Be free. The truth to set you free. Be free. The truth to set you free. Be free. The truth to set you free. Truth to set you free. Be free. The truth to set you free.
Yeah, thank you, Freddie. That was beautiful music. I'm Bill Carlton, a practitioner here at CSL Denver. I invite you to close your eyes, take a deep breath, and release all the negative emotions. And just be present in this beautiful world around us. We feel that oneness of God surrounding all of us. And we know that oneness is present in the message of Reverend Mark Gilbert, the music of Freddie, the technical support of Reverend Robert and Diego. Just as I know each and every one participating and attending this service is blessed, I'm grateful and give thanks for all that has brought us here at this moment. As we release these words to the universe, knowing they return to us tenfold. And so it is. The following is a quote from Ernest Holmes, page 488. The law of God is one of liberty and not of bondage. The Spirit of the Lord is everywhere. Freedom and liberty are also everywhere if we could but see them. Freedom, like truth, is self-evident, existent, and self-propelling. The Spirit, truth, and freedom are coexistent with one another. Whenever we are conscious of God or pure spirit, we are made free. Just be in that presence. And now more music from Freddie. Thank you.
God wants us to be free, to be one with Him. Just follow wants our trust so he can lead. It's such a must to see, believe, believe. God wants us to be free, to be one with me. Just follow that stream and be free in the sea, the sea. I have a dream, said the King. The glory of the Lord shall be revealed. His hope of equality, equality. God wants us to be free, to be one with me. Just follow that stream and be free in the sea, the sea. God wants us to be free, to be one with thee. Just follow that stream and be free in the sea. God wants us to be free and be one with thee. Just follow that stream to be free in the sea, the sea.
Good morning, everybody. Reverend Mark Gilbert here. It's so wonderful to be with you again, and I'm glad we were able to hear that song by Freddie. I love Freddie's music so much, and that song was just beautiful and set the tone perfectly for our discussion today. Our topic is Journey to Freedom. But before we get into that, I just want to acknowledge you, those of you who are online this morning, and those of you who may be listening to the recording of this program, that the very nature that you are stepping up and taking the time to do this represents the idea that you're already on that journey to freedom, that you're already recognizing there's something greater and grander in your lives, a spiritual essence that you want to learn and grow in, and I honor you for that. But I've also got to acknowledge, and I say this about myself, and I know it's true for many people, that once you can get on the spiritual path, you can be so serious. And I thought I would start off this morning by poking a little holes in some of the seriousness that we have with our spiritual path. And it gets to some pithy statements by a guy by the name of Greg Eisenberg. He wrote a book a few years ago, which my wife picked up, and we've been having a lot of fun reading through with some short, pithy statements that sort of poke holes at some of our spiritual thoughts and concepts. And to give you the idea of what the book's tone is, its title is Letting Go is All We Have to Hold On To. Letting Go is All We Have to Hold On To by Greg Eisenberg. So here's a few statements from Greg that I think would be pertinent for us to lighten up this morning. The first one he says is, I used to live in the present moment and plan to get back there again real soon. Can you relate to that? I know I can. Here's another. I'm under a lot of pressure to lower my stress levels this week. It's very true for us in these modern times and all the things that are going on. How about this one? Experience has taught me that I don't learn a lot from what happens. And given the state of a lot of what's going on in the world, I thought this one was appropriate. He writes, there's a global conspiracy trying to make us all believe only a few people control the world. Or how about this one? My inner witness has come to testify against me today. maybe we should get into talking about freedom a little bit. Here's a few about freedom. He says, knowing how perfectly free from suffering we could all be is what pains me the most. Or, creating a society which encourages unlimited freedom is what we must all focus on now, to the exclusion of all else. Here's one more for you. I'm celebrating how much freedom of choice I have because it's about the only option I've got available to me at this point. And finally, God only knows if I'll use my free will this time. Anyway, I wanted to start with that just to lighten things up just a bit, because where we're going for the next few minutes is to discuss about the idea of freedom and our journey to freedom. And I love the quote that Bill read earlier, because it sets the tone so perfectly for what we're going to be doing, which is looking at the words of Ernest Holmes. Ernest Holmes, of course, being the founder of Science of Mind and someone who looked at the common threads of science, religion, and philosophy and put together a philosophy that's growing and evolving even as we speak. And it's one that I think has a lot to offer us here in the 21st century. And I'm continuously learning from the words of Ernest. In fact, even in putting this talk together, I had some ahas going back and reading some of his words. But when he talks about freedom, and when I came to the Science of Mind many, many years ago, one of the ideas that, or one of the concepts that I got off the bat was he wrote a lot about freedom in his writings. And I recognized that when I would hear the word freedom in his writings, I came to this path with a lot of ideas about what I thought freedom was. Now, because I grew up in America and celebrated freedom, and freedom to me had this connotation, and I think this is probably true for a lot of us, it had the connotation of freedom as it relates to our country and to our society. We talked about living in the land of the free, or celebrating our freedom, or the fact that we are the land of freedom, that beacon on the hill that people can look to. Freedom always meant to me living in a country where we have basic rights and choices and the freedom to act upon them. We talked about the freedom of religion, the freedom of the press, the freedom to bear arms, the freedom for so many things. And this idea of freedom being instilled in me is the freedom, and that sense of freedom in a free society is what I sort of plugged in when I was reading the words of Holmes. But what I'm offering you this morning to think about is the fact that Holmes, when he discusses freedom, and when you hear the words freedom, he's actually talking about something greater and grander. And in fact, I want you to consider that he's actually talking about freedom from two standpoints. He means freedom depending upon the context of the words that he is saying. But I want to read something from the very first page of the Science of Mind textbook. The concept of freedom to Holmes was so central to our spiritual journey that he put it on page 1 of chapter 1. And let me just read you a fairly lengthy quote, but bear with me on this for a moment. He writes, "To suppose that the creative intelligence of the universe would create man in bondage and leave him bound would be to dishonor the creative power which we call God. To suppose that God could make man as an individual without leaving him to discover himself would be to suppose an impossibility. Individuality must be spontaneous. It can never be automatic. The seed of freedom must be planted in the innermost being of man. But, like the prodigal son, man must make the great discovery for himself. We see abundance in the universe. We cannot count the grains of sand on a single beach. The earth contains untold riches, and the very air is vibrant with power. Why then is man weak, poor, and afraid? Science of Mind deals with these questions. The divine plan is one of freedom. Bondage is not God ordained. Freedom is the birthright of every living soul. All instinctively feel this. The truth points to freedom under law. Thus, the inherent nature of man is forever seeking to express itself in terms of freedom. A lot of freedom, a lot of man is free. Man is has this freedom built into him. It's the very essence of Holmes' writings. So what is this freedom that Holmes is talking about? I offer to you that yes, it does include that sense that we came to Science of Mind with, that sense of that we live in a free country and that we're free to act. And it's about having the abilities in a society to act in a free way. But when Holmes uses that word, for most of us, in the most accessible way that we bring ourselves to it, is that he's talking about our free will. From the very first moments, he's talking about the fact that the core of our being is this freedom of will, that we're born with free will, and that the divine plan depends upon us exercising our free will. But what is free will? What is free will? Well, Holmes says that will means decision coming into execution. In other words, thinking and making a choice coming into action. Volition, choice, and will, he says, are all attributes of spirit and essentially mean the same thing. Volition means the power of conscious choice. So the very nature of what he's asking us to consider in the very first thing in terms of the idea of freedom or freedom of will is to know that we can choose our thoughts. So when Holmes stresses freedom, that's what he means. Freedom to choose our thoughts. Now, this is no matter what is going on in the world. Now, right now, we can look out at the world of form and look at the things that are going on, the political divisiveness, the racial issues that we're experiencing in the United States, obviously the pandemic and all that is surrounding that, and debates regarding masks and vaccines, and all of that nature can wrap up to us to feel that maybe we're not living as freely as we thought we could. But what Holmes calls us to remember in these moments is he's asking us to remember that no matter what the situation is out there, that we have the freedom to choose our thoughts. The freedom to choose our thoughts. This was no better stated, and I know many of us that have been on the spiritual path for a while are well aware of the work of Viktor Frankl. Viktor was an Austrian psychologist who got imprisoned during World War II in the Nazi death camps. And while he was there, as a psychologist, he observed the people around him and looked at what were the common factors that led to some people moving through the concentration camps that were able to survive and others that weren't. And when he got out of the camps, luckily he survived the Holocaust, he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning, where he outlined his thoughts regarding what it was that related to those who were able to survive the most horrendous situations with a lack of personal freedom to act. And what he recognizes that once a person lost the freedom to believe and hope for their future, that they were doomed. That what was really important was that they maintained within their consciousness a freedom to recognize that they could hold the thoughts of where their life was going. A couple of quotes from Frankl. He said that when we're no longer able to change a situation, we're challenged to change ourselves. And then he added, everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. In a sense, Frankl's findings from his experiences during the Holocaust and living in a concentration camp echoed what Holmes has been teaching us and writing about. The very fact that we have the freedom of our will to choose our thoughts, no matter what our outward circumstances are. Now, if you've been with Science of Mind for a long time, you probably hear that and say, well, that's just basic science of mind, Mark. It's choose your thinking, choose your life, change your thinking, change your life. It's all a matter of recognizing that we have the power to change our thoughts, and that through that we can direct where we're going. Well, but what's this got to do with a journey to freedom? A journey to freedom. Well, this gets to the second definition that I think Holmes wrote about when he talked about freedom. And he mentioned something called real freedom. Real freedom as distinct from freedom of will. Freedom of will being the freedom of our ability to choose our thoughts. But he also referenced something called real freedom. Now, to get at that, I'm going to read you another quote from the textbook, and this is from his definition of freedom. And in this, he writes the following. Real freedom means that man is created in the image of perfection and let alone and allowed to make the discovery for himself. Real freedom means that man is created in the image of perfection and let alone and allowed to make the discovery for himself. He goes on to say freedom of will means the ability to do, say, and think as one wishes, to express life as one personally desires. Now he goes on from there in the definition, but I wanted to stop there because it actually bears the point that I want to make, which is that key distinction that we have freedom of will to choose our thinking, but there's a greater and grander freedom that comes when we recognize the truth of who we really are, the truth of our oneness. And that's what he is pointing us to, and that's where we're going. When we talk about the journey of freedom, we're talking about a journey where we navigate through life to the discovery of who we really are. That's the distinction and the journey that we're on. So when we talk about journeys, we tend to think about we're starting here and we're going here, and there's a sort of an implication of a movement from one point to another point. And that's essentially what we are doing. We're starting at a certain point and we're moving along and going through a process of change. And that journey or that process of change that's in us is taking us to real freedom, real freedom. So one of the most famous journeys that we've talked about or we've heard about is one that Holmes referenced in that first quote on the first page of the Science of Mind textbook. And that was the journey of the prodigal son. Now, most of us know this story if we've had any experience with Christianity and the Bible. We recognize this parable of Jesus, that Jesus liked to teach in parables and stories, recognizing the value and beauty of stories to anchor something within us, but that the parables always had a deeper meaning than the surface events of the story. Now, what's the story of the prodigal son? Many of us remember it, but just briefly. It's where Jesus tells about a man who has two sons. There's a younger son who is an older son. And the younger son is anxious not to wait on his father to pass in order to gain his inheritance. So what he does is he convinces his father to go ahead and pass along while he's living his inheritance to his two sons. The father is convinced of this, divides up his wealth among the two sons, and then the younger son decides to go out with that money, that fortune that he's gotten from his father. And he goes out into the world and he squanders his fortune. He squanders it, his inheritance, and he ends up in a distant country. He wastes all his money in such extravagant living that he becomes so poor that he can't even feed himself. And he has to take on the role of caring for another person's swine or pigs, which is, in the Jewish culture, is the lowest of the low. So he is in this state one day where he's in the unenviable position of caring for pigs who are eating while he is himself hungry. And as it says in Luke in the Bible, that this younger son says, and when he came to himself, he said, how many hired servants of my father's have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and saying to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven, and therefore thee I am no more worthy to be called thy son. Make me as one of thy hired servants. And he arose and came to his father, and when he was yet a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion and ran and fell upon his neck and kissed him and hugged him. Now, in this story, this epiphany that is occurring with the younger son is leading him back to his father. His father is so excited that his son is returning that he calls forth all his servants, and they bring forth the ring and the robe, and they slaughter the fatted calf and have a great feast, which of course caused great angst in the son who didn't travel about. Why is his father throwing a great party for the son who went out and squandered his fortune when the other son just stayed there and didn't go anywhere and didn't squander his fortune? And when the older son complains about the celebration that's being made for the younger son, the father replies, it was meet that we should make merry and be glad, for this thy brother was dead and is alive again, and was lost and is found. Now, again, Jesus' parables have deeper meanings than the surface story. And there's been many, many interpretations of the story of the prodigal son. In fact, Ernest Holmes, because he brings forth that on the first page of the textbook, I don't think many students of Science of Mind recognize this, but later in the book, there's actually 10 full pages of the Science of Mind textbook that are devoted to this one particular story. I'm not going to go through all of those 10 pages, but I did want to give you a couple of quotes from Holmes as he begins writing and talking about this story that I've just outlined for you. He says, "The parable of the prodigal son constitutes one of the greatest spiritual lessons in the history of religious education. It is an attempt on the part of the great teacher to show that God turns to us as we turn to him, that there is a reciprocal action between the universal and the individual mind, and that the Spirit is ready to help us whenever we turn to it." Then Holmes goes on from there with a lot of interpretations about different aspects to the story. And if you're curious, you can get your Science of Mind textbook out and read those. But in conclusion, he says, "But to bring this story down to our experiences, for it is but a lesson for everyone for all time, we live in the midst of eternal good. But it can only be to us what we believe it to be. We are at the mouth of the river, but we must let down our own buckets and wish them to be filled with the pure waters of reality." Let me put this in my own words for just a moment. What Holmes is really saying, and what I think the story means to me, is it's really the story of our enlightenment. It's the story of the journey to freedom, to true, real freedom. What he means by this is we are born as spiritual beings moving through this human experience, and we have free will to make choices that are less than the greatest good for ourselves individually or for humanity collectively. We can screw up and screw up and screw up, but eventually, and as the prodigal son did as he roamed around, but eventually we're called back through the experiences of our life to recognize the truth of who we are, that we were born with the gifts to begin with, that we always had the value and beauty of the divine with us at all times. And it's in this movement, this going out in the world and having to experience the goodness and the sorrows and troubles that come with free will choice, that'll bring us back to spirit and bring us back home to returning to recognizing our oneness. And it's a true recognition of oneness that is really at the essence of real freedom. Now, I say it's enlightenment. And, I recall many years ago, I was reading or hearing the words of Adyashanti, a famous spiritual teacher, where somebody asked him, can enlightenment be immediate or can it be a gradual process? And his answer was, it can be either. And I think that's true for all of us, that there are those people who have those moments of awakenings where there is a click. Just as the prodigal son looked at the swine eating their food and had that click where he recognized the truth and had enlightenment in that moment and returned to his father, returned to his truth, returned to his oneness of his being. But for many of us, it's more of a gradual path where we are a little bit enlightened and we may screw up for a while, or we may stop at a plateau, and then we move on and we move on and we move on. And in a very quick nutshell, the path of enlightenment, or the path to true and real freedom, is one that takes us out from a state of where we're wandering in the desert like the prodigal son and spoiling our riches, where we're making wrong choices and we're living in victim consciousness, where we think that life is being done to us. And we live from a state of victimhood, where all the external world is acting upon us. But at a certain point in our growth, we recognize, and a lot of people, when they first come to the teachings of the science of mind, they recognize, the power of free will choice and the free will to have our own thoughts and through that create our reality. And then they come to a state where they can see that life is being done by them, by their consciousness. And they're allowing themselves to flow the conscious thoughts towards the direction. But there's still a state for many of us who are stuck there, where we see that even though we recognize the power to have life done by us, that we think we have to force things, that we think that it's always an energetic aspect where we have to devote the energy and effort to move those thoughts and to create the reality we want. And although moving from victimhood, being done to us, to being done by us, is a good positive step, at a certain point, we need to surrender to life, surrender to the fact that we recognize that all of life is an energetic flow of consciousness that is moving through us. And when we get to a state of inner awareness of the sense of surrender to that state of flow, we recognize we don't have to push the river of consciousness, that we can let go and surrender, and that life is done through us, that there is simply the creation through our thinking and our reality, that life is done in a continuous flow. And if we continue on the spiritual path, eventually we learn there's even a greater and deeper level for us. And that's where true enlightenment comes, where we recognize that the life is being done as us, that we and the Father are one, that the divine essence, which we call spirit, infinite intelligence, every sentient being and the technology that we are using, everything in the world of form and the world of non-form is all a divine flow, and it is as us. And when we can come to that state of as us, we are filled with a sense of love and joy and compassion for our fellow beings. Now, we live in modern times where this can be very stressful for us. And I just want to give you 3 very quick tips for how to move to that state of staying in this flow, to staying in this area of moving towards a journey to freedom. The first tip I want to offer you is to take the material world and hold it very lightly. Yes, all the stuff that's going on out there regarding the pandemic and the divisiveness and the world of form, it can be very seductive and very attention grabbing. But we have to hold it lightly and recognize that the world of form is only one aspect of our being, and that there is a truth beyond that, that is our spiritual nature. Many of you have often heard me say it's like we have a foot in the spiritual world and the foot in the material world, and it's true. And we can put our feet deeper into either side. It's like we're walking a tightrope. And on one side, we can fall totally in the world of spirit and deny the world of form. And on the other, we can deny the world of spirit and get totally immersed in the world of form. What I invite you to do is to walk that tightrope that always realizes and recognizes that you are born of spirit and that you're at essence a spiritual being. Tip 2 is because the world of form can be so seductive and hypnotizing, that you must take time for spiritual essence, spiritual reminders. You must meditate. You must pray. You must use affirmations. You must do spiritual readings. You must watch spiritual videos like this one to help keep you anchored in the awareness of the oneness of your life. Once you can do that, the more you can do that, the more you can come back into the world of form with compassion, with your eyes open to the truth of the nature that life is being done as us, and to open yourself to love and the love that's all around you. In conclusion today, I want to tell you just one story, because I think as you're anchoring yourself in this oneness, it's good for us to, as we go from holding life lightly, the external life lightly, anchoring ourselves in the divine, and then coming back into the world anchored in spirit, is that we need to be open to seeing the love and spirit that is moving through the world of form. And one example that occurred for me last week is this beautiful program that my wife and I tape every week. It's on CBS called Sunday Morning. And if you don't watch it, I highly suggest it. But you can go off on their website and watch the video from last week's episode regarding an individual who was a pizza delivery man in Tipton, Indiana. And this story is so beautiful because it talked about the fact that this man had been a pizza delivery driver for over 30 years in this small town. And even though his family encouraged him to get another job, he said this was his job that he loved. He saw it as his career because he realized that his life was one to bringing smiles to people, to bringing service to people. Yet the people of this town were touched by this individual. You know, that the very nature that he went out of his way to make change for them, to bring them their pizzas and so forth. And that this pizza delivery driver, his name was Robert Peters, that Robert saw his gift to give to these people. And eventually there was an individual in town, his name was Tanner Langley, who saw the gift being given. He recognized this flow of love, this life as Robert living. And he said, we need to give back to this guy. So he crowdsourced money to raise for a new car, recognizing that Robert's car was, old 1992 Oldsmobile and in need of repairs. And it took them over just 3 days in this small town in Indiana to raise over $19,000 to buy Robert a new car and insurance and gasoline for a year. And they showed him delivering the car to him, and the tears were flowing with everyone as the flow of love of the people of the city of Tipton, Indiana, cared for this individual who cared so much. And I think the closing words of the announcer were so perfect for this story, where he said that what Robert has taught everyone and recognizes is that the only job that you have to make the world a better place is the job that's yours. And what a perfect message for us this day. That job right now is for each and every one of us to recognize. Whatever job you have, your job is to make the world a better place, to be on this journey to freedom, real freedom, where we know that we are anchored in the divine is moving through us, life is being done as us, that there is a continuous flow of love around us. Yes, we walk in a world of form where there are challenges and things that are less than what we so want to experience, but if we can stay anchored in the divine, stay anchored in the truth of the oneness, feel that inner essence and live from that space, what a world that we'll create. Let's pray. So I simply know in this morning that this technology has brought us together for a divine perfection, that we are each free, not only free to choose our personal lives and experiences through the freedom of will, but I know that for each and every person that is listening to this message this day and on the recording, that they are opening themselves to that enlightened level where they know real freedom, where freedom is anchored in the awareness of the oneness of the divine, and that they live from that state, truly flowing with love, joy, harmony, and peace. I know that everything grand and glorious is happening for each and every one of us this day. I give thanks and I release these words, knowing they're so, and so it is.
Thank you, Reverend Mark. Very powerful talk. Staying anchored in the divine. We need to remember that. Thank you again. And we are so grateful and blessed for everyone's support of CSL Denver, whether it's in time, treasure, or talent, and especially during this time of change. Whether this is your first time joining us or you are a returning community participant, we want to thank you for your continuing financial support of the important work we are striving to provide. Right now, there are several ways you can make your financial contribution to Center for Spiritual Living Denver. This information is running along the bottom of the screen. And if you haven't already done so and you shop at King Soopers and or Amazon Smile, you can link your account to Center for Spiritual Living Denver, and our center will then receive a percentage of all proceeds. So email us if you would like more information on this option. So please repeat with me. Hold your gift in your hand, knowing that as you give, it returns to you a millionfold. And let's say together, this perfect gift is spirit in form, circulating and blessing all that it touches. Freely I give, and joyously I receive. And so it is. And for some after-service announcements, excuse me, at the beginning of the service, we are back to, with all that's going on in the world, just know that the practitioners are available to pray with you. We love to pray, and sometimes we need that. We need that support, like Reverend Mark was saying in his talk, that we need to be anchored in the divine, and there is nothing better than either doing your own prayer work, and if you can't see it for yourself, then call one of us practitioners or email us, and we will anchor that for you and hold that for you as you make your way through this time. So you can go to www.csldenver.org, and all of our names and phone numbers are on the website. And if you have a prayer request, you can email to info@cslddenver.org. And as we mentioned at the beginning of the service, we are back to having our virtual fellowship on Zoom this morning. And if you did not receive a Zoom invitation that I emailed out earlier this morning, just send an email to info@cslddenver.org and mention fellowship, and we'll send you a Zoom invitation right away. And we have an event coming up on Sunday, March 14th from 11 to 1, right after service. Our own Tim Hancock is facilitating a workshop on prayer or meditation via Zoom. And we invite you to join us in exploring what prayer and meditation is and how to use both in your daily spiritual practice. And again, you can email at info@cslddenver.org, and we will put you on the Zoom invitation list for that class. And a reminder that over at New Thought Media Network, they are offering a Science of Mind and Spirit lecture series on the Science of Mind textbook. And Reverend Elzia and Reverend Robert and several other people, Reverend Dr. Ken Gordon and quite a few other CSL ministers, are teaching that on Saturday mornings from 9 to 10 Mountain Time. And it's a wonderful way to revisit and get to know the Science of Mind textbook. So meanwhile, we affirm right here and right now that 2021 is blessed and perfect in all that it is. And we love you and miss you. Please take care of yourselves. And we will close out our service with more music.
We live in a world that is abundantly diverse. Woo! Each of us expressing the divine in our own colorful way. Yeah, with each of us expressing the divine in our own colorful way. The colors of the rainbow, yeah, so divine in their own colorful way. The colors of our skin, the divine in our own colorful way. The colors of the flowers, yeah, divine in our own colorful way. All life and creation is divine in its own colorful way. Our thoughts and our feelings, divine in our own colorful way. Yeah. Ooh, in our own colorful way. Yeah. Each of us expressing the divine in our own colorful way. The colors of the rainbow, yeah, in their own colorful way. Yeah. All life and creation is divine in its own colorful way. Our thoughts and our feelings, yeah, the divine in our own colorful way. Yeah, in our own colorful way. In our own colorful way. With each of us expressing the divine in our own